It began as a whisper, a rumor carried on the dry winds that sweep across the vast red heart of Australia. The idea was simple, audacious. To some, it was utterly mad. They planned to build a fence, not just any fence, mind you. This was to be a barrier of biblical proportions, a line of wire and wood stretching for thousands upon thousands of kilometers. It would cut across deserts, it would climb over hills, it would stand defiantly against the immense, untamable wilderness of an entire continent. The notion was met with ridicule in the bustling cities of the southeast. Men in smoke-filled rooms scoffed at the sheer folly of it all. The laughter echoed from the halls of Parliament to the local pubs. A fence against rabbits? They would chuckle. A wire to stop the dingoes? It seemed like a child's fantasy, a futile gesture against the overwhelming forces of nature. Australia is a land of immense scale, of powerful, ancient rhythms. To think that mere human ingenuity could impose its will upon such a landscape was seen as the height of arrogance. The continent had a will of its own, forged over millennia of flood, fire, drought. The idea that a simple fence could tame its spirit, could dictate the very movement of its creatures, was dismissed as a grand and expensive joke. They could not have been more wrong. The story of the fences is, at its heart, a story of invasion. It began with just 24 wild rabbits. Brought to Australia in 1859 for sport, they were released onto a property in Victoria. It was a seemingly innocent act. But with no native predators and abundant food, it was like lighting a fuse on an ecological bomb. The rabbits bred with astonishing speed. Their numbers exploded within a few short years. They moved like a living plague, a gray, surging tide of fur and hunger. They stripped vegetation bare. Lush pastures turned into barren, eroded wastelands. The land itself began to die. Australia's agricultural industry faced catastrophe. Sheep stations, cattle stations. The rabbits devoured the very grass livestock depended on. Without fodder, animals starved. Economic devastation followed. Ecological damage was worse. Rabbits outcompeted native herbivores. Bilby, bandicoot. Constant burrowing destabilized soil, causing massive erosion. The ancient balance of the ecosystem unraveled. Then there was the dingo. Canis lupus dingo, Australia's native dog. For thousands of years the dingo was the continent's apex predator, but with the arrival of sheep the dingo became the enemy. The construction of these fences was one of the greatest feats of manual labor in human history. Imagine this. The State Barrier Fence of Western Australia, originally known as the rabbit-proof fence, eventually stretched for over 3,256 kilometers. Further east, the Dingo Fence, a composite of many smaller fences joined together, snakes its way for a staggering 5,614 kilometers. That is longer than the distance from London to New York. It is a structure so vast that it is visible from space, a thin, faint line bisecting a continent. These were not small projects. They were undertakings of immense, almost unimaginable scale and difficulty. The work was brutal. Teams of men, known as fencers, ventured into the wilderness with little more than camels or horse-drawn carts, rolls of wire hand tools. They toiled under a relentless sun, in temperatures that could soar to 50 degrees Celsius. They dug holes by hand in earth that was often as hard as concrete. They strained to string taut lines of wire, their hands cut and bleeding. Water was scarce and the threat of disease and injury was constant. They were utterly isolated, sometimes not seeing another soul outside their work crew for months on end. Their companions were the flies, the dust, and the profound, intimidating silence of the Australian bush. The fences themselves were marvels of simple, robust engineering. The specifications varied, but a typical section of the Dingo fence stands about 1.8 meters high. The men who built them were not just constructing a barrier, they were physically redrawing the map of a continent, one wooden post and 1 meter of wire at a time. A decade is but a blink of an eye in ecological time. 10 years after the fences were completed, the changes were dramatic, deeply unsettling. On the safe side of the wire, protected from rabbits and dingoes, the land showed signs of recovery. Sheep grazed in relative safety. Pastures were no longer decimated by millions of rabbits. Pastures began to grow back, often with introduced grasses rather than native species. From an agricultural perspective, the fences looked like a resounding success. But to see the true effect, you had to stand at the fence line. Wide fence line photo with greener wild side and grazed farm side. On the sheep side, ground cover was sparse, grazed down by livestock. On the dingo side, the landscape was profoundly different. Dingoes roamed free, far fewer kangaroos, far fewer emus. Dingoes, as apex predators, kept large herbivores in check. Vegetation became thicker and more diverse. Shrubs flourished. Grasses flourished. The contrast was measurable. Two different ecosystems, separated by a few strands of wire. For farmers inside, life became more predictable, more secure, no longer at the mercy of nightly dingo raids. They could plan for the future, but security came at a cost. Reliance on the fence. A decade on, the fence had become a symbol of a deep, growing divide in the soul of the continent. The fences were built to control certain animals, but their impact rippled through the entire animal kingdom in ways no one had predicted. The most obvious victims were the creatures that became entangled in the wire. Large kangaroos, emus would run into the fences at speed, especially at night. The result was a slow and agonizing death. Wedge-tailed eagles, other birds of prey swooping down on carrion near the fence line, would also become caught. The wire became a silent, indiscriminate killer, a linear graveyard stretching across the continent. The toll was constant, quiet, and immense. The fences also created genetic prisons. Populations of animals, from large kangaroos, small reptiles, ground-dwelling birds, were suddenly cut off from each other. This fragmentation is disastrous for the long-term health of a species. It prevents the flow of genes, leading to inbreeding and a loss of genetic diversity. A population trapped on one side of the fence becomes more vulnerable to disease or localized environmental changes like a fire or drought. The fence was not just a physical barrier, it was an evolutionary one. The story of the fences is written in the lives of those who live alongside them. Take a man like Bill, a third-generation sheep farmer from western Queensland. To him, the dingo fence is not a scar, it is his shield. He tells stories passed down from his grandfather, tales of ruinous nights when dingo packs got into the flock, scenes of carnage. He remembers the constant stress and the sleepless nights listening for the howl of a dingo on the wind. For Bill, the fence means peace of mind. It means his children can inherit the farm. He sees the wire not as a prison but as the thing that allows his way of life to continue. Then you have the fence patrollers, a unique breed of outback dweller. Men like Tom, who spent 40 years driving the same stretch of fence in South Australia. His world was a narrow corridor of dirt track and wire. He knew every post and every dip in the land. He tells of finding camels tangled in the wire. He tells of digging out sections buried by monumental sand drifts after a storm. He tells of the loneliness of the job. He speaks of the strange beauty of it. Contrast this with an indigenous elder from the APY lands, which the fence cuts across. She speaks not of sheep or economics but of a severed connection. The fence, she says, is a wrong line. It cuts across a song line, a pathway of spiritual significance traveled by ancestors for millennia. Scientists now use the fence as a gigantic ecological laboratory. The fences did more than just divide landscapes. They divided philosophies. On one side stands a vision of Australia where the land is primarily a resource, a place to be managed and controlled for human economic benefit. This view sees nature as something to be tamed, pests to be eradicated, assets to be protected. The fences are the ultimate expression of this worldview, a clear physical line between the productive and the wild, the profitable and the problematic. This philosophy built the nation's agricultural wealth and has supported rural communities for generations. It is a view rooted in the pragmatism of survival and prosperity in a harsh land. On the other side of the debate is a growing understanding of ecology. This view sees the continent as a complex, interconnected system where every element has a role to play. It recognizes the dingo not as a pest, but as a vital apex predator essential for the health of the ecosystem. It sees the value in biodiversity and the long-term resilience of the land over short-term economic gain. This philosophy, championed by ecologists and many indigenous Australians, argues that the fences, by disrupting natural processes, are causing irreparable harm. It calls for a move away from brute force control and towards a more holistic way of living with and within the Australian environment. This great divide now defines the future of conservation and agriculture in Australia. The most shocking truth that Australia's great fences revealed is this. Our attempts to control nature often create bigger, more complex problems than the ones we set out to solve. The fences were built with a simple, clear objective, to keep certain animals out. But the land is not simple. It is a web of infinite, intricate connections. By cutting one or two threads, the rabbit, the dingo. We did not fix the web. We caused it to distort and unravel in ways we could never have foreseen. The explosion of kangaroos, the release of the fox, the loss of biodiversity, the erosion of the soil itself, these were the unintended consequences of our grand design. We learned that an empty landscape is not necessarily a healthy one. The wild side of the dingo fence with its top predator is paradoxically a safer place for many smaller native creatures. It is more resilient, more diverse, healthier. The dingo, long demonized as a villain, was revealed to be a reluctant hero, a keystone species holding the entire structure of the ecosystem together. The shocking truth is that the pest we sought to eradicate was, in fact, the land's own guardian. The fences stand today as the world's largest unintentional ecological experiment. They are a lesson etched in thousands of kilometers of wire and dust. They teach us humility. The future depends not on the lines we draw, but on our wisdom to see the connections that lie across them.